So a little bit about myself. I'm attending the University at Albany. I'm majoring in business administration, and I hope to pursue the financial analytics program at this college. Um, so to begin, sorry. So to begin, the whole environmental kind of interest started at High Meadow. Um, they always kind of talk to students about the importance of environmental issues and just even within classes, like whether it's science class or history class, they always encourage us to incorporate learning about climate issues and solutions. And they were big on like composting and recycling and all that very early on. So I think that had a pretty big influence on me. In eighth grade, they sent a couple students to called it the YES program, which essentially was a bunch of students from all across the country and some students internationally. And it was a two-night, a 2-day program where essentially it was courses on different environmental issues and solutions. And it really just helped students kind of brainstorm ideas on what they could do individually and as a collective. And then we all went back to our schools and kind of share that information and try to implement to the best of our ability. So Alan told me about the ECC, I believe, in 2020 during COVID, and it was pretty interesting. So I started attending several meetings, and then after 4 or 5 meetings, I applied to be like an official student member, and then I did, and then I got in. And so that's where kind of the journey regarding what we did during the high school. So during this time, I did an online pilot program with Cornell Cooperative Extension. Essentially, this was a 12-week program, and essentially every individual would create some type of plan, some type of environmental program they wanted to do. So some people did like master gardening, so they would create some type of plan to create some type of garden in their local area for their community members. So for me, my plan was to create some type of presentation for the school board of education to kind of get them more aware of these issues and just educate them in terms of potential solutions and potential directions the school could go to making them more sustainable. So basically they broke down, we got into groups with other individuals working on different projects, and there was a lot of brainstorming between individuals. So we would go into different meetings with people and meet and discuss ideas about how we could improve our plan. So the Cornell Cooperative Extension Group, they used what they called SMART goals. So talking about like specific goals that could be very specific, not just vague generic goals, and then making them measurable in terms of actually being able to say, okay, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and being able to be analytical regarding the steps we need to take, and then achievable. Is this goal achievable given the time span and the resources and your time commitment to it? Is it realistic in terms of like how much, given your resources and all the other factors, how realistic is achieving this goal, and timely in terms of what is your time frame? Is it a couple of months, a couple of years, so on? So just taking all this into account when creating our plan. So for me, it was to start to find out the possible Rondout Valley like ways the school could be more energy efficient. In terms of measurable, just trying to meet with the principal and different teachers and different administrators. And the first thing for me was just because at this time it was just me, so it was really just to see if I could create some type of presentation for the board just to get them aware, and then hopefully that lead to a domino effect in terms of other programs, and to do research regarding potential solutions. And in terms of the time frame that I allotted, which was obviously going to be a couple of years because these types of things takes a long time, especially within school districts, since things tend to change very, very slowly. So during my sophomore year of high school, this was like the first time I went back in person to school. I was looking if they had an environmental club that I could talk to other people about. And at the time they didn't, but I met with a teacher, Kathleen Mcpeek, who was working there, and she worked with different classrooms about, I think, plant science, and also she worked with managing the greenhouse at the high school, which has an annual plant sale in which they sell flowers, vegetables, and things of that nature. So we started meeting one-on-one and started brainstorming ideas, and then we created the official club. And the club was always pretty small in terms of group members. We only had like 3 to 4 individuals, just because it was, it was a lot of we like time commitment, just because there was always something to do in terms of, okay, now we have to email this person, and we have to set a meeting with this individual, and so on. So it was definitely a big time, took a lot of time, which was a big thing. So here are some key members to the whole process. Sophia Clark, who's currently a senior, she joined the club basically right as it started, and she's been a pretty big person in terms of keeping things running at the high school. And so she's been really helpful and just been very good with participating in all our events and things like that. Kyle Falaha, he graduated 2 years ago, but he also was one of the original student members, and he was very helpful in terms of just trying to create ideas and help us out. Kate McPeek, which was the initial original advisor, she really helped a lot in terms of trying to guide us as students and just trying to help us in terms of how we could do things better. Lisa Giannico, she was a big like community member who helped us a lot in terms of during our waste audit and just always meeting with us and things like that. And Iris Marie Bloom, who was also joined, and her and I last year went to meet with the new superintendent to discuss about purchasing industrial dishwashers, and we both went to the Board of Education meeting, which I think made a pretty significant difference. So a lot of our effort was spent on meetings because we would constantly have to meet with different people, because if we met with one individual, they would always redirect us to another individual, and then constantly having to go from one person to the next. So that was one of a pretty big challenge. So we met with the superintendent. He was pretty, not the current one, but the previous one, and he was very pretty open to the idea. What we found is that it wasn't that individual administrators and teachers were necessarily against the idea of trying to make the school more sustainable and doing this and that. It was just the feasibility and the amount of work each individual would have to do. The facility manager, this was a very tricky situation because I believe in the last 3 years, they've had 3 different facilities managers. So it got a little frustrating because we met with one facility manager. We kind of had a plan sorted out in terms of using a part of the budget to purchase the dishwashers. And then we'd find out they got replaced, and then we'd meet with a new one and have to reset that entire connection and be like, okay, this is what we're planning to do. What are your thoughts on it? And then they would get replaced. And so it was very, it got a little frustrating after a while. So that was definitely something we had to deal with. The principal, she was very on board with it, and she met with us quite a few times, and she was pretty helpful in terms of just trying to get us connected. And community members, Lisa, Iris, and Laura, she helped a lot. They all helped a lot with not just helping us sort waste, but also just meeting with us and meeting with other community members and the administrators. So we conducted a waste audit and for one week, and essentially Typically, originally they had two trash cans and that was it. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to collect data and then analyze that data regarding the waste within the high school cafeteria and essentially present that data to the Board of Educations because um, realizing that just talking about, hey, we want to do this and that, and not having some type of substantial data that can back our claims, it just felt as a group it was better to have some type of data that we could present to the Board of Education to be like, hey, this is what's going on. So we had a couple bins. So one, we had a bin for compost, we had a bin for recycling, we had a bin for trash, and we had a bin for trays. So we initially weighed the total amount of trash, counted the number of trays, and also weighed the amount of compost that was produced. And Lisa and Laura helped us a lot with managing this. So here's some data that we found within the waste audit. And obviously keep in mind, there's going to be some type of variance in the data if you do it on a longer time frame. But on average, we found that the school, just the cafeteria alone in the high school produced around 54 pounds of waste, which would lead to 270 pounds per week, which is around almost 11,000 pounds per year. And this is just one high school cafeteria within the entire school district. This doesn't count the elementary school or the middle school. And in terms of the number of trays, it was around 163 per day, 813 per week, and 32,000 per year. And although the trays didn't have substantial weight to them, they took a large amount of volume, which would fill up trash bags and just not great. And a side note is that these trays were technically compostable. However, an issue is that although they're compostable, you have to send them to very specific industrial composting facilities for the trays to actually properly break down. And they were just being thrown in the trash, so kind of defeated the entire purpose of being compostable. Um, so after this waste audit, we had a couple recommendations to replace these disposable utensils and trays with reusable cutlery and trays and utensils, and to implement a composting program within the high school, and try to reinstate a more rigid recycling program because there was a recycling program, but it wasn't really enforced or like managed very well. Um, and another thing was trying to incorporate more locally sourced food, especially since this is the Hudson Valley and there's a lot of farms and all that, and just trying to make the high school cafeteria more healthy. So that was the four things. So to do these things, we would require an industrial dishwasher because to have those reusable trays and utensils, you need to wash them, obviously. And what we found was I believe Iris found a report on a Minnesota school, I believe a Minnesota elementary school that implemented reusable trays and cutlery and purchased industrial dishwashers, and those schools found a pretty substantial savings, and those financial savings, increased as time passed, and obviously they reduced a significant amount of waste. So we had to keep in mind that waste was primarily produced within the cafeteria, but also within individual classrooms because a lot of students would eat lunch or breakfast in their classrooms, so they would still have to dispose their waste. So trying to have like recycling bins and maybe even compost bins in classrooms where there was a high volume of kids, because within the high school, it wasn't like each classroom had a rough distribution of students during lunchtime. It was really just few classrooms, like 3 to 4 classrooms that had a large amount of students in there during lunch. Another thing was to have photos and directions of like posters of in terms of recycling and composting. to make it very clear for students on how to sort their waste properly. Also to implement some type of education and training for teachers to make sure they can be like, hey, to the students, like, be mindful and aware of this and just try to do it properly. So by implementing a composting program, it reduces a significant amount of waste that would have either gone to the landfills, which is good for the school, but also just good environmentally, generally speaking. It also is just good to educate students about like trying to be more environmentally conscious, which will carry on students and just help in the future. Um, and also, as time goes on, the school could definitely use this compost either to use for their own, gardens within the schools or plants and all that, or they could sell it or donate it. So you have another stream of resources that you can use. So as a group, we attended multiple Board of Education meetings. Some we just sat in on, but multiple we talked and discussed and presented about our concerns and recommendations. So we went to the Board of Ed and we shared our data about the waste that was being produced within the high school and how much waste could be reduced if we implement these programs. And it was pretty, we received a lot of positive feedback from the Board of Education committee. The issue that we ran across was, although there was positive feedback, if we as a group didn't continuously remind them of, hey, these are next steps, things wouldn't really happen. So it was kind of up to us to make sure the ball would keep rolling and just to make sure things would get done. So a couple struggles we faced as a group was, as I said before, most individuals, and we didn't really see we didn't see too much aversion towards the programs. It was more just for administrators, it would just be another task they would have to do. So it was more just constantly reminding them and constantly meeting with them to keep them up to date and tell them about, hey, this is what we need to do, this is what we'll do, and this is what we need you to do. And just constantly having meetings with a bunch of different people. And also constantly changing facilities managers. That was definitely a big thing that kind of was a roadblock for us. Yeah. So after we conducted our waste audit, we continue to monitor the waste station. So instead of 4 bins, we ended up using 3 bins, so just trash, recycling, and compost. And every lunch period, a student would stand there and just be like, hey, just make sure to sort these properly and just help students sort properly, because if an environmental club member student wasn't there to help advise students when they were sorting their waste, it wouldn't really be very effective, just because either students don't know or they just don't really feel like it. So that would definitely contaminate a lot of the, sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry about that. So it would, if the sorting wasn't done correctly, it would contaminate the recycling, trash would be thrown in the compost, and it just, you can't really compost it when there's mixed with recycling and trash and vice versa. So that was definitely a struggle. And since we only had 3 to 4 student members and 1 advisor, it was kind of difficult to someone always being there during lunch times, because Rondout has 4 different lunch periods, 2 lunch periods for BOCE students, and then 2 different lunch periods for students at the high school. Eventually, last year, we started sending our compost to a local composting facility. And I think at the end of the year, we composted around 1,200 pounds. So it was, it was a good first step in the direction, good direction. So as I said before, a big issue is without students being there, the waste sorting the waste just wouldn't happen. And so having students constantly needing to be there to monitor was definitely, it took, it was pretty took a strain on all of us because it would essentially mean that we would have to give up our lunch period every day just to make sure it stayed working. And if one of us was out, that would really mess up the sorting. And so that was definitely a big struggle that we faced while sorting. So to make this process a lot easier for the club members, but especially the student body, having reusable trays and containers and would definitely make the process easier because it really just came down to in terms of the behavior of a student in terms of okay, there's like a tray, utensils, and then a bunch of different stuff. So it's like, okay, where does this go? Where does that go? And then just giving up and just throwing in the trash to not deal with it. So having trays and utensils that you would put aside and then just throwing like your uneaten apple in the compost and like a water bottle, like a plastic water bottle in the recycling would make the process a lot easier for students. And that way it would be more efficient and less waste contamination would occur. And this would also all require the purchasing of an industrial dishwasher. So purchasing an industrial dishwasher was our big first step towards trying to reduce the overall waste within the cafeteria, just because if you want to have reusable utensils and trays, you obviously need a dishwasher. So eventually, industrial dishwashers got passed in the budget, which was a pretty big deal. Good first step. So they haven't installed them yet, but I believe they should be done by 2026 school year. And I don't know if it's next school year or the year after, but within the next 2 years, they should have them installed. And once they have them installed, purchasing just composting, recycling, and trash bins, and purchasing reusable trays and utensils will definitely help reduce waste significantly. And they purchased in dishwashers for each school district, which was another good thing, so that not just the high school, but the elementary and middle school could also start moving towards the direction, which would reduce the whole school district waste by a lot. So the club has a new advisor, Krista Sheehan. She's a biology teacher at the high school. So I talked to Sophia and she mentioned that the composting program was on a pause, and I think there was some issues with the new facilities manager that they were dealing with. And so that's something that the club is still trying to figure out. She did mention that they started collecting recycling from individual classrooms and that teachers were pretty on board with the whole thing. So that was good to hear positive feedback. So just making sure that the club has enough members and continues running and just making sure they're involved when the industrial dishwashers get installed. And so the club and administrators are all on the same page. So in terms of future plans, obviously installing once the industrial dishwasher gets installed, that will be a big step. And then just trying to pass uh, a budget to have and reusable trays and utensils is also another thing. It obviously won't be as big of a financial burden for the school, which is good. And finding a new student member for the ECC, that way they can continue, or the Marbletown ECC. So they can help. So ECC members can help the student work with the high school and just make sure that connection stays. Another thing is once the industrial dishwasher and the reusable utensils and trays get purchased, to make sure that to track this data. So we have the data pre-industrial dishwasher, reusable in terms of how much waste was being produced, and then track data post. Once we have the industrial dishwasher, this way we can say, okay, this is the amount of waste that was reduced by purchasing these items, the cost savings, and just we were talking about creating some type of scientific report regarding the overall waste reduction and potential cost savings over several years. This way we could create this research study or paper or whatever and share it with other school districts to show, look, we did this program, this is how much we reduced waste, and this is how much we saved. And because a big issue is the initial investment of trying to reduce waste is pretty significant, especially with the industrial dishwasher being pretty expensive. So that's definitely a big roadblock for administrators, just trying to, even though in the long term, if there are potential cost savings, you still have to deal with that big initial investment, which is a big thing that we have to work around. So yeah, that's basically a summary of my high school experience with the environmental club and with the ECC, and just the process being very many steps and just explaining how it went. And so we're not at the point, the club, where we've reached our goal, but it's definitely moving towards the trajectory. We just need to make sure that uh, everyone's on page and that it continues to go smoothly, and then should be able to start seeing significant waste reductions within the following years. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Questions?
I have a.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Who has one? Someone else can go. Okay, I'll do it. Um, I'm just curious what every student gets. So that, do they get like a little plastic bag with a fork and knife and napkin? Do they get a water bottle? How big is the water? Like what
For
does every
lunch.
student get for lunch? Yeah.
So you'll get a tray, and then you'll get like fruit, and then you'll get like some type of drink, milk or orange juice, and then whatever they serve, like a burger or whatever. Or you could get like a salad bin with like a clamshell styled container. So those are the two main options at the cafeteria.
And those are on plates.
So the food is on like flat trays, not like disposable trays, not like plastic trays.
A disposable plastic tray with little sections in it.
Yeah, disposable compostable tray.
Compostable tray.
Yeah, but they get thrown out, so they're not
They get thrown in the trash.
yeah, so it doesn't really.
So no water bottles, but they have orange
You,
juice, things like that.
yeah, you can purchase like a plastic water bottle, but that's different.
Okay.
Yep.
Siddhartha, what was the reaction of the staff in the cafeteria to all of this?
They're pretty like on board with it. The main issue is just the staff is the staff within the cafeteria is contracted out, so they're not, a lot of them aren't actually school official, like hired, they're contracted through a third party company. And so that was something that we had to, that could be a little, that was really tricky for a while, because I think their contracts are like 5 years or something. And obviously within those contracts, they're very specific. This is what you need to do. This is what you don't have to worry about. So getting a dishwasher would mean they would have to do some extra stuff or doing things differently, which could potentially cause tension. But overall, they were pretty on board with what we were doing, and we met with them several times.
And did you ever meet with any parent groups about this?
Um, don't think so. No, not really. I don't. We may have. I don't believe we did though.
Did you get any feedback from parents?
Not really. I mean, overall, we talked to some community members, and it was mostly positive, but we didn't meet with like parent groups that I remember.
What about the students? Did you get feedback from the students?
Yeah, student feedback was it's so the thing is it's not that students are against making the school more sustainable. It's just a matter of like putting the little extra effort to sort your food, which was the main thing. Just being like, hey, it takes like an extra like 10 seconds. Can you please sort this properly? So that was the main. It wasn't that students weren't necessarily against composting and doing this. It was just more like extra effort, which was just like, hey, come on, please, you know. So it was okay overall, student feedback.
Iris?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when we testified at the board, there were a lot of parents there. They might be there. They were there maybe for other issues like the cell phone policy, and security and other things, but it felt supportive. I'll just say that. And there, when we made that point that students can go to school for from kindergarten to 12th grade and never see a metal spoon, it kind of got a reaction from both the board members and they started kind of reminiscing about how when they were in school, they they used metal cutlery. They had reusable trays. What else would they go sliding down the hill in the wintertime on but a reusable cafeteria tray? So it created a good atmosphere. But I did have a question, Sid. Um, One is, remember we were trying to get data about like the sheer number of thousands of plastic utensils that are used every year, and we tried to get that data, and it was for some reason it was hard to get. I think that you have some numbers on that. Do you, because that would be a good baseline for the study that we're gonna hopefully do.
I think um they don't the cat what they told us was that the actual cafeteria staff, like they don't track the number of utensils that are used. They just track like students who bought lunch and like how much they paid for and like what type of meal was it, regular or extra. So if we were to track that, I think we would have to do it independently and just count individually. But I
Mm,
do think to get a rough estimate, we could find out like when they buy in bulk how much are like
exactly.
so. But yeah, so we would definitely have to talk to them more.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Great presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Michael?
Yes, good presentation, Sid.
Thank
My
you.
question has to do with the bins in the cafeteria. It sounds like before you started, there were two bins, one for garbage and one for
Oh no,
recycling.
there were two garbage bins.
When you started, yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
One,
yeah.
one for like plastic, returnable bottles and the other one for garbage, yes?
No, no, sorry. There were two trash cans essentially. So it was just trash cans. There wasn't really recycling.
Oh, I see. So everything went in the trash. Okay.
Yeah.
So then when you had three, where was the combustible materials kept in between day, from one day to the next?
So while we were doing the waste audit, we didn't have anything set up with a compost like company.
Compostable, I said combustible.
So we just had to throw it, which was kind of wasn't the best, but um, it's just because it took a like longer than it should have to get in contact with the compost company and get approval from the school, which was that was I would say the biggest thing was what we were trying to do, and our goal wasn't very difficult and not very intricate. It wasn't like doing rocket science or anything. It was just we have to get approval. They have to sign this. They have to get approval. They have to sign this. So just constantly having to go through those steps was very time consuming. And it made something like getting in contact with a compost facility and signing some paperwork that could be like 1 day, stretching out a couple of weeks just because this person didn't do it. And so things like that that's definitely the biggest challenge, just trying to work.
But
school.
at the end of the day, was the compostable materials from the cafeteria that day all dumped into one bin, and there's a new bin, and where is it?
During the audit, yes, it was dumped in the trash. Last year, it was kept separate and then at the end of the week, the facilities manager, some of their employees would ship it off to the composting facility.
Kept separate where? Outside, I guess.
Oh yeah, there was a separate, we put in a separate bin outside.
Okay, so
Near
the
the
Board of
campus.
Education had to spring for somebody driving to the compost facility, like once a week or once?
Yeah, it was like once a
And
week.
also for an additional bin to keep the compostable stuff in,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, but this year they got a new facilities manager, so it looks
Mhm.
like that was on pause. So
Uh-huh. Okay.
they'll have to talk to them again.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lisa, you had your hand up. Do you still have a question or?
I just wanted to tell everybody that during this process, Sid and his students made an initial presentation to the school board about the audit and what they were suggesting. And Sid, you and the students did an incredible job of convincing that auditorium that this was needed. And the school board and the superintendent gave their full support to this project. So you need to pat yourself on the back. I have a question for you, Sid. If you were to do this all over again, what would you do differently?
Question.
You can think about that and answer it later if you want.
I think for a while, I kind of waited too long in terms of like if I sent out an email and I didn't get a response back, I kind of just let it wait sometimes. And I think I should have been a little more persistent in terms of like, hey, let's speed this up more. And yeah, I think the main thing was just trying to be persistent with people and like, hey, we can't be slacking off this much. This should not take this long. It's kind of getting ridiculous. So I think just trying to be more persistent, just trying to make things go faster. Because I think that was the one thing that irritated me was just how slow.
So we
things
go
would
down
move
to
at
Sarah where it
times.
says react.
Yeah, so
Todd, to ask your question.
Ah, I'm sorry, Ann was asking me how I did. Okay, so we have our transfer station. We have to sort our recyclable. We have a paper, we have glass, and so forth. You don't have that, right?
I don't
The
believe
recycling
so.
is just all.
It's just it was just one bin.
It's just the food scraps. They were
That's the compost. That's compost. I'm talking about recycling.
No, we just for the recycling bin it was just one. It's just the issue was that the more bins you have with high school students, the more complicated the sorting becomes, the more complicated it becomes, the less likely students will be willing to do it. And so it was just a balance of, okay, how can we make this sorting properly, but also not overcomplicate it so students would just not do it at all. So that was something that we ran into a lot.
Well,
Anne? You're muted, Anne.
Okay. Yeah, the town of Rochester, the plastic bag recycling thing, we have found that, there was a new supervisor came to town and she hired new people at the facility. And since that happened, that our plastic and film recycling committee was having to do all the work. Similar to, it reminds me of like how you had to have only the few people in the club were had to stand there and make sure everybody did the right thing.
Yeah.
When we got help from the staff, it really, really helped a lot. And was thinking, in an ideal world, or maybe, who knows, maybe it's not totally out of the question that you could get a staff member to help do this.
Yeah, that was something we talked about. It was just since it was the whole composting program was less of the school administration and more of a club event. So it was a little tricky trying to ask teachers to do it just because it's not technically a thing that was told by the administrator. So there was definitely that something.
Maybe
But
maybe not the teachers, maybe some other, employee of the school.
yeah, there was like one or two employees who were pretty like open and like encouraging. It's just
I think it has to get, the administration has to be behind it.
yeah, that was the main thing, just because it was mostly student run. So once the dishwasher gets installed, that I think it will slowly become more administrative oriented.
Yeah. Well, I had one other question, which was, unless somebody else has a question? Wondering, Siddhartha, if you're in business administration, whether you envision combining that, not, expertise with what you've gained, as an environmental activist.
Sure, why not?
If you
Yeah.
thought what businesses you could be involved in.
Yeah, that was something I looked at a little bit in terms of having like businesses having like environmental consultants and just trying to make the business more environmentally conscious. That's definitely something that crossed my mind. So yeah, I think that's slowly becoming implemented more within that world and having different like the whole new thing of ESG reports and ESG ratings for companies like it's like environmental, socially, governance. It's just like rating companies based on carbon emissions and things like that. So I think if that continues, I think it will lead better direction business wise so that companies are more held more accountable for practices and good and bad practices. So I think that's could be a potential avenue. Yeah.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was having this vision of you being being the successor to Greenway, when Josephine and Shabazz need to hand it off to someone, that big composting enterprise. But yeah, holding corporations accountable and holding companies accountable is just so difficult. It's hugely important. So that's inspiring. My question is also a little bit in the weeds of what happens in the cafeteria because I still haven't physically been inside the cafeteria to see it.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is once they get the dishwashers, they buy the trays, they buy the utensils. Some schools use reusable plates and bowls, and then like real food goes in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of boxed food or so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that. And it's related to this other question I had of what is recyclable at the school because I've never heard really any description of any materials that are used in the school lunch that are recyclable at all.
Yeah.
Because those cardboard containers, they're composite, they're not recyclable. So that's kind of a two-part interrelated question about next steps.
So yeah, so for the first one, I think I I hope that during that process of when they start buying reusable materials, it's basically all like trying to be more reusable reliant and having other ways of doing it, unless there's like very specific circumstances where like I know sometimes the school like provides food to families to take home. So I think that could obviously be exceptions. But in terms of just food eaten and disposed of within the school grounds, I think majority should be reusable because once you have the dishwasher, it doesn't make practical sense financially or just using common sense to have this expensive dishwasher and be throwing out plates. It's just not very smart. In terms of the second regarding recycling, right now it's just kind of single stream. So once it gets more established, it would be best to see if they can, well, the thing is, the location of the recycling bin kind of determines what type of recycling, since majority of recycling bins within classrooms is just paper scraps, but majority of recycling within the cafeteria is mostly like energy drink bottles or whatever, just bottles. So I think that shouldn't be too difficult in terms of sorting it. So I'm not too concerned regarding recycling. It's just making sure that cross-contamination doesn't occur, because especially it was very clear with the composting companies were like, if it's contaminated, we can't compost it because it's just contaminate everything. So just making sure students, it's just like a culture thing. Since it's new, doesn't really know what's going on. But as time passes, it's introduced within the middle school and elementary school, it'll be more of like, okay, this is how things are run. I think over time, contamination would be reduced and just overall student cooperation will be better. It's just time. It just need to give it time and make sure it's the culture and how things are run. I think that's the big thing.
Wendy, Saul?
Oh, you're on mute, Wendy.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Wendy, you're muted.
Wendy, you're on mute.
Siddhartha, you have really been a champion in terms of the Rondout project, and we are all grateful for what you've done. But I'm thinking about how to sustain such an effort in Rondout and in any high school. And it seems to me that one of the things we need to do is find an advisor, either someone on staff or even a parent who could be a support. When I read the bios of kids who have graduated from Rondout, they all talk about what athletic programs they're in, sometimes what music programs, what sort of intellectual Olympiad things they do, and drama. And I am wondering if there would be any way to tie this environmental work to either the WISE program or a statistics class or a biology class or something that would sort of give it some heft within the school.
Yeah, it's good. So the tricky thing with that is classes are at Rondout are either Regents courses, so it's constructed by the state, or college level courses, usually done through SUNY Ulster or like SUNY-Albany. And both those situations, they have a pretty rigid like timeline regarding like what topics they cover. So it gets kind of tricky with trying to insert new material, especially with like advanced placement and honor classes, because at least in my experience, those classes are very always constantly fast paced. So yeah, that would definitely be something. It's good. It just would take a lot of time. And I believe one of the WISE model presenters 2 years before I did WISE, her program was on composting, and that's kind of where it first started within the high school. Yeah, definitely continuing with effort and persistence is definitely one thing that the club, we have to just make sure that it doesn't die off, because just to make sure that there's some type of structure and continuous effort, because that's really what makes things
I
happen.
would just like kids to hear that this will help them when they apply for a college or when they apply for a job. And I don't know if we're making enough of that opportunity. That's it.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Are there other,
I don't know
go
how to
ahead.
raise my hand on the Zoom. I can't find the button for that. But anyways, was curious. how many people were in the environmental club when you were there, and how many people are in there now? And if anybody's kind of taking up any kind of leadership role in that?
So when I was there, it was ranged in 3 to 4 students and 1 advisor. Now, I don't really know. I'm guessing probably less, maybe like 3, 2. But I know Sophia is definitely, she's done a good job at kind of stepping up and taking things. It's definitely going to be something they'll have to talk about in terms of trying to find a new person to lead the club to continue.
Are there any clubs that might go on hikes or river rafting or kayaking, any outdoor activities that might be a little more attractive than recycling, you know, to high school students? Fun.
The tricky thing is there were other people who were interested in joining the club. It's just like most students participated in sports, and the meeting times for the club would always just be after school, and that's when sports practice happens or sports events happens. So getting new members was always a big challenge. Getting around that, I mean, it's just really dependent on the students' interest and their willingness and how much time and effort they're willing to put in. So finding new members is definitely a bit tricky, but I think it's not impossible. It's, just takes time, I think.
Andy?
Hi, in regards to get your hand up, if you move your cursor down, React is the where you can get your hand up in Zoom. I think it's important, you were talking about saving money for the school district, for the voters, sorry, not the voters, for those of us who pay property taxes. So that's something I think that should be recognized, or at least that side of, because you have trying to get members. Oh, also you had students buy the 3 bins, and they should be recognized somehow by the school for having done something for the school, for the school district, for the property owners, property taxpayers. And that would let people know, students know, that what you're doing and how they could help as well. So I think the money, it would be very important to people, saving the money.
Yeah.
Maybe more important than the environment, but
Yeah.
yeah. Is there a school newsletter?
Yeah, they send out, I believe they send out, and the principal sends out a weekly newsletter every Sunday, I believe. And they did mention like what we were doing, stuff like that. So there was some recognition involved. It's a hard sell to ask students to basically give up their lunch period to monitor waste stations, because that's kind of like the only free period we have. So it's definitely a hard ask. So yeah. But I think getting teachers involved as time passes will definitely reduce student reliance, and I think that'll make it a lot easier.
Are there any more questions?
I know,
Oh,
I could use a thing here, but I'm just gonna raise my hand. Do you have an idea how much this dishwasher costs?
Yeah, it was around 600,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that year the actual budget, I may be wrong, but I don't think it actually was raised that much or raised at all prior compared to the prior.
Sid, it was part of a capital budget, leftover money from another capital project. Use that money, so it actually didn't cost the taxpayers additional money. They were just lucky enough to have enough money left over, so they use that. And there's a district newsletter that comes out to all the taxpayers. We get it right before the school budget, so you'll see that.
So that's 600,000 each, or for all of them?
I think that was for all the school
Okay.
districts. I may be wrong,
The-
but I'm pretty sure.
I was,
If it's okay if I jump, yeah, the biggest cost was actually the redesign of the kitchens, because when they all had dishwashers, right?
They had them at one
Historically.
time?
So when they decided to go with single-use plastics 20 years ago, or however long ago, all the kitchens were redesigned without dishwashers. So the biggest expense is not the purchase of the dishwashers, which they are a chunk of change. It's like 30,000 each or something like that, right, Sid?
I think it was a little
There was
higher.
a sliding
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
It wasn't hard and fast, but the architects have to redesign those kitchens with the ventilation for the dishwashers and all that stuff. So that's the big expense.
And you have to hire a dishwasher also,
Well,
person to feed the dishwasher.
or people,
I mean,
yeah, exactly. So you
yeah.
have to rearrange staff a little bit. And they did already have their contract, as Sid mentioned, with the third party folks. But when we asked them, hey, you can still do this work, right? You work with dishwashers in other schools, right? They do. So they'll do what they're told. I forgot the name of the third party contractor. So it's really a matter of political will and decision making, which
There
Sid did
Is there
such a good job.
nationwide movement towards dishwashers from plastic that you know of? Because it seems like everything's gone to plastic now. Is there another one coming back towards washing dishes?
Yes, there's a company that we work with to help restaurants and schools pay for purchasing their reusable foodware. And so schools and restaurants get reimbursed for that, and the school has that information. So that's a big savings for them.
So there is a movement, but it's amazing how much pushback there is from, school staff when people first push for this to go back to dishwashers. There's often a lot of, complaints about convenience, and people just get used to throwing stuff out. It is horrifying. So it's going to take a lot of work. So we should, Sid's point about doing a study about this is really important, because that Minnesota study shows it calculated the carbon saved and the money saved. And it even talked about how the middle school students had to be trained to stop throwing the reusable metal forks and spoons into the trash, because they're so used to throwing everything out. So it's a good detailed study, but this might be the only example like of its kind of an entire school system in a particular county switching over.
Yeah, I think also the high school has a science research program through the University of Albany, where students conduct research studies. So that was something, because also the Krista Sheehan, who runs the environmental club currently, also runs the science research program. So that could definitely be a research study that a science research student could conduct over, from sophomore to senior year. So that could definitely, it would probably be a lot better in terms of making, because the big thing is just what the Board of Ed wanted to see was just that this was more student-led, and it's when it was more student-led, they were a lot more on board about it. So just trying to keep that theme going of making students be participated in this is kind of a big thing. Yeah.
thanks to everyone for a lively conversation, and thanks to Siddhartha for all his hard work and a great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sid.
Yay, Sid.
Thank you.